downloads of Proton VPN alone had soared by 1,800% on the day that the act became law. They also put out a statement which said this kind of spike in usage in percentage terms is what they would normally expect to see in a society that is undergoing a civil collapse. And as to actual VPN use, it emerged that various politicians, including ministers of the state, were not only buying VPNs for their own use, but they were getting me to pay for them. They were charging the expenses for their VPNs back to the taxpayer, which, is just horrifically hypocritical.
Welcome, everybody, to Bitcoin Politics. I am your host, Frank Corva, the political correspondent for Bitcoin Magazine, and I'm joined today by none other than Freddie New, head of policy at Bitcoin Policy UK, our first international guest. I say that as someone who's based here in the United States. Not only is it exciting that Freddie is coming to us from the United Kingdom, but he's actually coming to us having gone back in time to the year 1984, as he's currently living in a dystopian reality in the United Kingdom, which we'll be touching on today. Freddie, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you very much, Frank, for that intro and also for having me. And, sadly, I'm not living in the 1984 of my dreams, which is James Cameron's LA just after the T-800 arrived. I'm living in George Orwell's version, so...
We're going to get into that a little bit today. It's been pretty wild to watch. There's been this deep feeling, at least seeing this and, seeing feeds like yourselves on, like your own, what you're posting on Twitter and what Susie's been posting, Susie being sort of your co-founder at Bitcoin Policy UK. And for those who don't know, Bitcoin Policy UK is like the UK's version of the Bitcoin Policy Institute. I'm saying this again from an American-centric lens, of course, and my apologies to the international audience for that. But Freddie and Susie do really incredible work trying to educate policymakers in the UK about the importance of Bitcoin. Right now, it does not seem to be of the utmost importance to them, nor does privacy and freedom of the internet. But we will dive into that. But let's start with what seems to have spurred, or what has spurred, this crackdown on the ability to use the internet, which I believe is called the UK or the Online Safety Act. So could you give us a little bit of an overview of what this act is, Freddie, and then what it's done to the internet in the UK?
Absolutely. So the first thing to note is this is actually quite an old piece of legislation in that it's been in the pipeline for a long time. So this is not the creation of the Labour government or the preceding government. It's really a brainchild of a lot of people in government from many different political parties, and as such, they are all equally to blame. And at the same time, no one is solely to blame. It's unfortunately a real demonstration of the ways in which politicians and regulators fail to understand both the internet and human nature. So it's quite a significant 1-2 punch of, I don't understand people and I don't understand computers. Normally people misunderstand one or both, and it's one of those, but it's quite rare to misunderstand both quite so badly. By way of example, there is a story of Nadine Dorries, who was the minister at the time. Apparently went into a meeting with Microsoft's executives, and the first thing she said to them was, right, when are you guys going to get rid of the algorithms? And if I were a Microsoft executive, I would not really know where to begin answering that question. That's like saying to someone who drives a car, when are you going to get rid of the roads? It displays such an extraordinary failure of understanding. So the first thing to say, I think, is that this piece of legislation has been in process for a long time. Second thing to say is that it obviously, and like most pieces of legislation of this kind, it has ostensibly very laudable aims, which is protecting children. And that's not just protecting them from obscene material, also protecting them from websites which may lead them to suicidal ideation or to self-harm. And I think wherever you sit on the political spectrum, we can all agree none of us want children to harm themselves. That's just a fundamental human truth. No one wants children to come to harm. However, that's also acknowledging that it's also a very easy way for those with authoritarian tendencies to push through pieces of legislation which enable them to, perhaps in the kindest way possible, to do a bit more than protect children from harm. And that's exactly what seems to be happening with this piece of legislation. I can give you a few examples if you like. When this became effective, it was then incumbent on any tech company, or in fact any company at all, which operated a forum that enabled user-generated content, so posting, whether that be speech or videos or pictures, that each relevant business had to have robust age verification processes in place to ensure that no material, be it written, visual, or even audio, was capable of being accessed by minors at that point. And we are seeing absurd instances of this already happening in the UK. People are unable to access their Spotify accounts unless they go through age verification. On the day that this became effective, I went to the beer Reddit. There's a big craft beer movement in the UK, craft ales, IPAs, and so on. That is now inaccessible unless you do age verification software. And my favorite personal anecdote is an owner forum for those who have hamsters as pets had to close down their forum because the cost of compliance with the legislation was too high. So just on the off chance that you see a dead hamster, these guys are unable to host their forum any longer, which is utterly extraordinary. I don't think this is an exaggeration. It's the most egregious encroachment upon free speech by any government in the global north that I have ever seen in my entire life.
Very, very scary. I guess my thoughts here is that what I would expect or what I would hope is that most people would maybe freak out and start pushing back. Has that been the case or not so much?
Well, it's interesting you say that. Proton put out some data, which said that I think downloads of Proton VPN alone had soared by 1,800% on the day that the act became law. They also put out a statement which said this kind of spike in usage in percentage terms is what they would normally expect to see in a society that is undergoing a civil collapse. So comparing us to, Somalia or to Afghanistan during the recent Taliban takeover, which is again is extraordinary for the UK. And as to actual VPN use, this is my favorite hypocrisy story at the moment. Politico, on the very same day that Peter Kyle, our Minister of Technology, was going on doing the news rounds, telling people if you use a VPN, a child dies. I mean that's a paraphrase. The same day, the same day he was doing these interviews, it emerged that various politicians, including ministers of the state, were not only buying VPNs for their own use, but they were getting me to pay for them.
Taxpayer funds.
Exactly. They were charging the expenses for their VPNs back to the taxpayer, which is just horrifically hypocritical. And if they try and say that
Wild.
they're using VPNs for government business, that is likely to be incorrect. Any government business would use a government developed and issued VPN created by our security services. They, so that argument doesn't hold water for me.
Absolutely stunning. Given that this is a Bitcoin show, I want to tie it back to Bitcoin and maybe some other freedom tech as well, like Nostr. So, has this impeded at all on people's ability to use Bitcoin? And I'll include in that maybe a custodial wallet. So maybe send Bitcoin from their, I don't know, Coinbase account in the UK to their ledger device or their cold card device, and or for something like Nostr, if you're using a client, let's say like Primal or something. um, I would imagine they can't implement age verification on something like that, but I also don't know how limited things are. Can you even access something like Primal or Iris or any of the other sort of web browser applications on Nostr? What has that been like?
Good question. So Noster is a ray of light in this rather dark world at the moment. Personally, I run two different Noster relays. All of my own Noster posts are backed up with those relays. And as you rightly point out, it is impossible for them to implement this on Noster because it's not a company, it's a protocol. I think I may have mentioned I was at Baltic Honey Badger. That one of the key takeaways that I left with was that to preserve our privacy and our freedom, whether that is privacy of our freedom of speech or our freedom to transact, both I think are equally important. To preserve this, then moving from a world of companies to a world of protocols is the way forwards. Protocols can't be given a subpoena. They can't be fined. They can't have their CEOs dragged in front of a court or in front of a parliamentary committee. So moving from corporations, which are subject to those kind of restrictions, and towards protocols, I think is the way forward.
I agree with you to a large extent, but having just sat in the courtroom and watched with my own two eyes as the Samurai developers agreed to a plea deal, and then also was there when the guilty verdict was read for Roman Storm in the Tornado Cash case. One of the things that comes to mind is, yes, protocols are great, and I think even the protocols that were built, the technology that was built that underlied Samurai as well as Tornado Cash, I think was great, but some of these protocols need front end interfaces. Doesn't that still lead us to a similar problem? Like, it's not that everybody has this technical knowledge to know how to interface with the protocol. So in the case of Nostr, let's say you still need clients. In the case of Tornado Cash, you still need a front end. What does this make you think? I mean, should we be learning how to build our own front end so that way we're not businesses and we get to engage with these protocols as we see fit?
Th- That's quite a short question, but there's a lot of information there. So I may give you quite a long and roundabout answer, actually.
Please, please, please. That's what I'm here for.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like a Phil Zimmerman quote that Cali flagged earlier this week, that
Yep.
if privacy is outlawed, then only outlaws will have privacy. So to your question around people accessing these protocols and understanding how to use them, I've done a degree of work over the last couple of weeks trying to pull together some threads on the small steps that everyone can do to just incrementally improve your privacy. So no one in the digital age is ever going to have perfect privacy, but you can be slightly better than the next person. And it's important that, improving your privacy even slightly is better than not taking the step at all. So, for
Yep.
example, using a VPN, as we've discussed, maybe thinking about using Proton email rather than Gmail. Maybe you're going to learn about Tor and how that works. Set up a Noster key pair. Start posting, explore Prime and explore Iris. Understand the difference between a progressive web app and one that goes through the gate-kept worlds of the Play Store or the Apple Store. So a progressive web app, for someone who hasn't used it before, I'm sure most of our listeners have because we're Bitcoiners, but they enable you. It's effectively a return to the old internet where everything was browser based rather than app based. And personally, I'm very old. I'm very old school. I love being able to run my own software on my own computer without going through a gate kept walled garden like the App Store or like the Play Store. Um,
Yep.
that's not necessarily something that I think there's a kind of a lost generation in the middle who grew up with the iPhone and for whom everything was basically done for them, was amazingly simple. We're kind of getting, I think, a positive note is that we're getting back to that via, um, ironically, partly a piece of EU legislation, which is going to force Apple, for example, to open up its operating system to third-party developers to a much greater extent, in the same way that Android allows you to run an APK. You can download an APK and install that. And in fact, I did that just this weekend with BitChat. And then sort of coming back to, and then again, look at this through a more hopeful lens, there are a bunch of really, really smart people working who understand the risks here, working on applications like BitChat or like White Noise, which you can download the APKs, you can install them on your Android phone, you can communicate much more privately than you might otherwise, and you via something like BitChat, which uses the Bluetooth system on your phone to create effectively a mesh network between different phones that are running the software that are within range. Those are really interesting nascent technologies, which I think is very important for us to explore, because back to your 1984 point, we live in a world where governments are trying to surveil and control as much as they possibly can, and privacy is a human right. Each of us have a right to that, to a certain degree of privacy, and we should be allowed to choose how much of ourselves we disclose to the world. And that's a foundational principle from the Cypherpunk Manifesto.
And I think without even mentioning, the Cypherpunk manifesto or privacy is a human right going that far. Like there's a certain amount of things on a daily basis that we keep to ourselves that we choose not to share with people. So I think when it comes to this stuff, obviously the pushback tends to be, well, what do you have to hide? Why do you need privacy? What do you have to hide? And I think another way to sort of maybe frame this and think about it, at least, is like, I don't think of you as a very radical human being. I don't think of myself as a very
Mm.
radical human being. We just sort of want a certain amount of privacy, the same amount of privacy had when we were handing either British pounds to someone else, physical British pounds, or American dollars to someone else. But let me sort of push back a little bit on that. We know that Bitcoin was designed to be the digital version of that, of cash, but it's also not, because our British pounds, our physical British pounds, or physical dollars couldn't be transported to North Korea overnight. So when you do engage with policymakers, lawmakers, what is it like to sort of broach those sorts of harder to deal with questions, I think? And I say this again as someone who just sat in a courtroom for 3 weeks for the Tornado Cash case, 3.5 weeks, listening as the judge and the prosecution harped on the fact that it was North Korean hackers who did use this service to launder a lot of funds. And even the defense saying, yeah, that's a terrible negative externality of this tech existing. No question. We're not going to argue with that, but it doesn't mean the tech shouldn't exist. Do you have anything to add to that? Or is there a better way that maybe we could be thinking about this when we speak with those in power?
I have some stuff to add, but it's not particularly original, but I think it's worth reiterating nonetheless.
Yep.
So the first thing to say, with specific reference to the Roman Storm case, I as a lawyer, was actually relatively sanguine at the outcome for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the two most serious charges to facilitate sanctions or evade sanctions, and the second charge relate that
Money
so
laundering.
yeah, exactly, money laundering charge. And the first charge was the effectively running an unlicensed money transmission business, which you or I could do via the United States mail, for example.
Yep.
The charge there was only 5. The maximum sentence for the charge that he was convicted for was only 5 years. And I thought the commentary from Judge Feiler was actually very, very illustrative of the fact that she felt that this was not a correct decision that the jury had reached. And I think we mentioned the FinCEN guidance. The 2019 FinCEN guidance
19.
explicitly,
Yep.
exactly, makes clear that what Roman Storm was doing was not running a money transmission business. And I think that's the correct point of law. But as I understand it, the jury, as they were instructed, had no choice but to find him guilty of that charge. Personally, I think there's a very strong chance that he will, as Judge Feiler suggested, appeal and probably be successful on appeal. And I think for me, this really just kind of boils down into a relatively simple to understand image, which is, if you are a builder of roads and someone uses your road to transport illegal munitions, or they are DUI, or they drive recklessly and a passenger in their vehicle dies, you as the builder of the road are not responsible. There is no and the legal system has developed over hundreds of years. And the United States and the UK share a lot of characteristics of their legal systems. The concept of the extent to which your duty of care extends beyond the people to whom you demonstrably owe their duty of care, it diminishes with distance. So part of the job of the prosecutor is to show that you owed a duty of care to prevent a tortious wrong, or did you have a contractual duty of care in an agreement that you'd signed with someone? Contractual duties of care in the case of writing software are out of the window, because it's fairly well established that those are not contracts. They're not even invitations to treat. So then you're down into sort of tortious wrongs, and in terms of the civil trial, and I think the same principles would apply to you on a criminal basis. Have you got, and again, not to get too legally techie here, but to prove that someone has committed a crime, you need to have traditionally two elements. One is called the mens rea, which is the guilty mind,
Yep.
and the other is traditionally the actus reus, the thing that was done. Some crimes are crimes of strict liability, which means that you don't need a guilty mind. And I suspect this is the avenue that the DOJ were pursuing. So you just need to have done the thing in order to have been guilty. And I think this is the logical reasoning that meant that the jury had to convict on this ground. Was it a crime of strict liability, and had Roman Storm done it? Oh, well, then, yes, technically, then you reach a guilty verdict. But that's undermined if the actual thing that he did was not in itself criminal. And
Right.
I think the 2019 FinCEN guidance makes it very clear that it's not. Roman Storm is a road builder, and he is not responsible for criminal actions that happen on the road that he built. That's where
Yeah.
I kind of leave it from a legal principle point of view.
I can add to that too. So when the samurai, when the defense for the samurai case, there was a Brady disclosure that they asked for. They asked for certain to make sure that no information that had been kept from them previously that could potentially make them innocent. I can't think of a better way to put it. Be that that essentially the prosecution wasn't hiding any information, and then the prosecution came out and said, actually, we had spoken with two people from FinCEN. This is beyond the 2019 guidance. Those two people actually said, now these are higher ranking people within FinCEN, we don't see how you'd be pressing this charge. They haven't violated anything as per the guidance that we've issued, and they still went ahead with it anyway. And also, this I don't believe that Brady disclosure was brought up in the Tornado Cash trial, but Judge Faila, I'm going to pronounce her name wrong, the judge for the Tornado Cash trial, also brought up this idea of like, I don't care what FinCEN said, we're trying this case regardless. And it
I
was
remember
both
that.
of these. This is what the plea deal was premised on. For those who don't know, in the Samurai case, they were charged with two of the same counts that Roman Storm was. They just had the money laundering and then the conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmission business. And they dropped the money. The SDNY dropped the money laundering charge as well with them. Stuck with the unlicensed money transmission charge again, which FinCEN said we shouldn't even be trying this. When I see this kind of stuff happen, and I'm looking, at your feed and Susie's feed, and I'm seeing what's going on with internet privacy in the UK, I'm not gonna lie. I'm just like, what am I doing here? What are we doing? Like, are we gonna? What is the path to victory at this point? If literally, if federal courts are saying we do not care what the federal government has said, we're going to continue to proceed with this. Not only that, we don't care what the Deputy Attorney General of the United States has said. Todd Blanche issued a memo in early April saying we're not going after developers of crypto mixing technology and other crypto technology or platforms. They went after it anyway. For the record, I've mentioned this on previous episodes of the show as well. I emailed Todd Blanche every other day for weeks on end. Couldn't get a response from his from the DOJ. When I see this, I'm bringing this up because you and I are in similar positions. You're a policy advocate. You're doing what you're doing. I'm reporting from the White House and reporting on politics. But for the most part, we're interfacing with people in power, people who can. I mean, in the case of the DOJ, they could have told the SDNY, Southern District of New York, which is where the Tornado Cash and the Samurai Wallet cases were being held. They could have told them to stand down. We're not. They could have given them a directive to say we're not going after these sorts of developers anymore, but they didn't, which makes me believe that sometimes, with the Trump administration, there has been some good stuff that's happened. Maybe some of it is performative, though, and we're sort of heading in the wrong direction. Let's say we are. What can we do? What can the average person do at this point? What sort of route should you and I be taking at this point to have the proper conversations that will hopefully set things back on a better course?
I mean, it's very, very much not easy. And again, thinking as a lawyer, I tend to, and it's funny you mentioned that we're in a similar position. I'm a corporate M&A lawyer, and suddenly I find that I've kind of evolved and sort of into a privacy campaigner. It's just, in some ways, I default always to basic legal principles of our legal systems, which have evolved over many hundreds of years. Like I mentioned, the US and the UK systems are similar, and I like often to think of the United States as the UK perfected. A lot of thinkers. I live very close to where Tom Paine wrote The Rights of Man, and he obviously came over to the United States. There's a strong community down near where I live of people who still hold on to libertarian ideas that in many ways found their ways into the United States Constitution. And I think the US Constitution is a fantastic document. It's an extraordinary piece of work produced by people who thought very thoughtfully about these principles, which I think captured some fundamental truths about the way that free societies are supposed to function, if you really think about them from philosophical based principles. And for me, those remain true, even though I'm not a United States citizen. I believe a lot of the Constitution captured lightning in a bottle. I believe that people
Mm,
should be free to choose to live their lives peacefully how they want to live. I believe that no form of thought should be forbidden, even though you may vehemently disagree with it. And even though some of the things that people think may be wrong or incorrect or offensive, I don't have a right not to be offended, but I do have a right to say things that I believe are true or which are my opinion, and I shouldn't be locked up for saying or thinking those things. If those things are wrong, then they should be proved wrong via dialectic or via argument, not by some imposition of physical power over me. And for me, those are very fundamentally important principles, and I think they go with me for all American citizens if they thought about the, and one of the things I love about coming to the US is I meet people who actually do talk about these things and think about them.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. What can we do to protect ourselves? I always think about these things in two spheres, one macro and one individual. From an individual perspective, I've already mentioned some of the things that I've recommended and many other much more intelligent privacy advocates have recommended. What can you do to preserve some privacy? How can you surf privately, message privately? And again, I fundamentally believe the majority of people are not lawbreakers. We simply want to live our lives peacefully. We pay what taxes we're due. We contribute to society. We are good members of a civil society, and if the government wants to find stuff out about us, it needs to ask. It doesn't get automatic right to find out what I'm doing and thinking. I don't allow the police free access to my house. I'm sure
Right.
they'd love it, but at the moment they still need to knock.
Yep. Yep. Agreed with all of this. I think that while I'm hopeful on some level, I do a show with Julian Farr of Bitcoin Laws, the founder of Bitcoin Laws, and we talk a lot about how Bitcoin and even these privacy conversations are sort of kind of invoking civics lessons. The civics lessons we should have learned in school. They're now giving people a reason to learn these lessons. I mean, when you think about, at least in the United States, you have so many people now following the way that the bill making process works on the state level because they want to see certain Bitcoin bills get passed. And I think this is a really, really good thing. My only fear, and I say this as a former teacher, is that maybe we don't learn fast enough, but that also this isn't just going to be a matter of education. I think, and I'm not trying to be like too dramatic about this, I think it's going to be partially a matter of courage, saying I'm going to run this software on my computer regardless. And I don't know if that's too dramatic to say, but I think it speaks to what you were saying earlier, is that we might have to like take a step back and move back from these apps that are sort of neatly presented to us in the app store, learn how to download an APK or learn how to download something on the computer, on our computer, run it ourselves, learn how to run a Nostr relay, obviously run a Bitcoin node, maybe even set up your own Lightning node. Do you just think that maybe in the grand scheme of things, maybe it's good that we go back to this fundamentals, right? I mean, in some ways, maybe Bitcoin with like the whole treasury company craze and stuff. I love you, David Bailey, if you're watching. I'm not, it's not casting shade. I'm just saying, but maybe it is a sort of, maybe it's like, we've all talked a good game, talking about freedom, technology, and everything else, but when it comes to learning stuff, pain is often the best teacher. And maybe people are going to start to feel a certain amount of pain that's going to make them go back to the fundamentals when it comes to operating this technology themselves. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're completely right. I couldn't agree more. And again, stealing a quote from one of your founding fathers, that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots.
Yeah.
I have felt a little uncomfortable recently about some of the stuff I've been posting online because I have directly provided people with the material they need to remain private and to remain able to access what they want to see freely. Uh, and fundamentally, the key reason why I object to the Online Safety Act is not because I don't think children shouldn't be protected. I do, but it's mainly because I see the voluntary submission of this volume of data as creating a gigantic honeypot that
Yep.
will inevitably be hacked, inevitably be leaked, and will expose all kinds of people to the most horrendous information leaks, which could potentially themselves lead to self-harm and to suicide. You remember the Ashley Madison leak when it was leaked that people were on this website that enabled you to have affairs. Can you imagine how
Yep.
big the Pornhub leak is going to be in 2 to 3 years' time? When half
Yep.
and I think this really drills down to a problem that we have around APKs up until now, and it's your need point that you just made. If there's no need for people to learn how to use this stuff, they won't bother.
Yep.
I'm perfectly willing to admit that I'm a very, very small subset of geeky weirdos who, I really enjoy this stuff. I like learning how to use these different privacy tools. I like fiddling around with my computer. I'm a computer builder. That was a gamer and builder. That was how I came to Bitcoin originally,
Oh, cool.
with a
Cool.
combination of the financial crisis. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, we come to Bitcoin in different ways. But funnily enough, and this is a bit of a flippant point, if the government are messing with people's porn, then that means that there's going to be a lot of highly motivated people out there trying to find a way of accessing porn without telling the government that they're watching porn. So I think the government may
Oh,
have shot
Lord.
themselves in the foot here, because they've
Yep.
suddenly created an army, as we've seen the data that I cited earlier from Proton. There's now
Yep.
millions of people saying, "How do I watch Pornhub without access? Oh, brilliant! There's a VPN. Oh man!" And then they go down this privacy rabbit hole, and suddenly the
Oh, my
government's created
Lord.
20 million cypherpunks.
Yeah. It's 100% true. And it's funny. It's like, yeah, that's all. That's kind of all it takes. But there's another dynamic that I think I wanted to touch on. I think, well, that's also true. There is a certain level of, I guess, education and maybe arm twisting that goes on when it gets people to maybe see what you and I have seen. Now, you spent part of your youth in Africa. I've spent, I wouldn't say my youth in Africa, but parts of my 20s and 30s in different parts of Africa and in Ghana and in Namibia. And I've traveled around the continent a bit. And in Latin America as well. I lived in Venezuela under Chavez. And when you live in these places, people are very, very willing to use things like Bitcoin, privacy tools and stuff, because they see what's going on. They're just living in places where they're either cut off from the traditional system, living under an abusive government, something like that. And so it's much easier. I think you and I have both been to the African Bitcoin conference. We have friends on the continent and in Latin America. And it's much easier to sort of describe the value prop there. I think here, maybe Pornhub is doing, access to Pornhub might be describing the value prop better than than Bitcoin or whatever. But do you find it, I guess, more difficult to try to sort of, educate your country people in England about this stuff, just because they just don't believe it's ever going to happen to them? And do they finally start? Are they finally starting to see that it is happening to them?
I think that's a fantastically fundamental point. So I studied at Cambridge University, one of the oldest universities in the UK. A lot of my contemporaries went either into the civil service or into finance and law and accounting. Well, myself among them, I'm a lawyer. And the people who are most resistant to talking about Bitcoin are almost without doubt my contemporaries from Cambridge. And
Mm,
these are the people who end up in the biggest positions of influence in the United Kingdom, whether that be in Downing Street or in government or in law and finance. They are people who are. It's the classic Jesse Myers article. The why do the yuppie elite dismiss Bitcoin? You have an intersection of people with high intelligence, yes, but also high trust in the system,
yep.
and that trust is justifiable because the system has been very good to them. They've tended to have had excellent education, and they've gone on to have good, secure jobs, and they believe they're doing good things. So obviously, to them, Bitcoin looks insane and like a scam, just because their heuristics have conditioned them to
Yep.
recognize the things that look like Bitcoin are not trustworthy. Which,
Right.
again, I love Jesse's article. I recommend it all the time. If anyone hasn't read it, dig it up. It's absolutely brilliant. So yeah, that's kind of what we're up against in the UK. But I think your point about having seen different use cases and needs of Bitcoin is 110% correct. It's if you've, I mean, the TLDR is if you've grown up under a dictatorship, immediately you understand the need for a money that your dictator cannot stop. It's just obvious. If you've grown up in a country where, you know, inflation is 70% per year, it's obvious to you that you should store your money not in your Zimbabwe dollars, but in something else. And
Yeah.
I'm a free market maximalist. I'm not going to force people to store their money in Bitcoin if they want to store it in gold. It's your money, you make your choice. I firmly
Yeah.
believe that even if I disagree with your choice, it's your choice, and I shouldn't interfere with your ability to make it.
Yep.
And also in PayTech terms, which I think is the third limb. So maybe your PayTech systems do not work as well as they do in the United States or in the UK. And if that's the case, then Bitcoin offers a really interesting payment alternative, which is probably better than your domestic alternative. And whether that's Lightning or Arc or one of the other layer 2 solutions, then you have options which probably function better.
As far as solutions moving forward, you said very clearly that some of the solutions are just going to have to be technological, and there are very bright people working on them, and I agree 100%. But even the cypherpunks, even cypherpunks like Adam Back, have said part of the issue is going to be the technology, the other part is going to be legal, and we know that politics is involved inextricably linked with the legal. So when it comes to, let's just say, the UK for now, I've been in touch with the likes of Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. He's talked about being pro Bitcoin, and also not just like pro Bitcoin for ETFs, but for actual use as currency. I think he's at least proposed a bill that says as much. Who are you guys supporting? I know Starmer, I think his approval rating is currently less than 50%, maybe 41 when I last looked. I know this is not your favorite human being, so maybe I shouldn't have brought him up. But yeah, how do you move forward there? How do you like what does seem to be the best political track forward? I think in the United States, the world sort of saw that. I have to say the crypto voter here. I'm a Bitcoin guy, but the crypto voter really played a role in the swing states. It was for those who don't know, I think there was when you looked at the vote differential between Biden and Trump in 2020. There were 10 times as many crypto owners in those swing states than there was a vote differential. So, for example, let's say in Arizona, only there was maybe 10,000 votes that separated Biden and Trump in 2020. There were 100,000 people that owned crypto this time around. So you just needed a certain percentage of them, 11 if I'm being exact, to be single issue voters. And now Trump wins every swing state. So obviously, Trump appealed to the crypto voter, the Bitcoin/crypto voter. It paid dividends for him. He's president again. Is this going to be the same thing in the UK? Is it a big enough issue at this point for that to matter that much in the UK's politics?
That's a fantastic question, and I think the quick answer is that MPs do not yet realize, and then the government does not yet realize quite how many people care about this issue. Conceptually speaking, support for Bitcoin and for cryptocurrency in general, it's kind of a no-brainer. Most people don't care about it, but the people who do care a lot, and they will aggressively support people who support them. They
Yep.
are very loyal in terms of their support for people. Putting some raw numbers on it, the latest FCA data suggests that about 12% of adults in the United Kingdom actually own Bitcoin and crypto.
Mm.
Not clear how much each of them own, but maybe they've dabbled, maybe they've just got a Coinbase account. 12% of adults is 7 million people. And for context, the Brexit vote, which took us out of the European Union, was won by something like 1.5 million votes. So
Mm.
a block of 7 million highly motivated voters is a large block, and that is big enough to swing elections. So part of our strategy is to highlight to MPs that there's a significant block here, which will be very, very loyal to you if you support them, but conversely will also be very, very angry with you if you don't.
Mm.
So part of our tactic here, we are about to launch a set of APIs which will enable you to plug in your postal address, find very quickly who your MP is, automatically generate an email which we will have pre-drafted for you on various different issues, be that adoption of Bitcoin, be it debanking, be it pushing back against CBDCs. So learning from other campaign groups like Big Brother Watch in the UK, who do a fantastic job on this already, by the way. Shout out to those guys.
Yep.
We want to make it very easy for you to send letters into your MPs, and this is like I mentioned earlier. It's the macro and the individual. So from a bottom-up individual basis, our rough plan is to reach out to as many of the grassroots Bitcoin meetup organizations there are across the country, which there are many. Get as many letters into as many MPs as possible. Make it clear to these guys that this is an electoral issue, that in the same way as we saw in the United States, potentially could swing elections. And then also from top down, we at BP UK continue with our slightly drier, dustier academic work of writing long papers that I suspect very few people will read. But that the plan there is to get as much data, accurate information into the FCA, HMRC, Treasury, into the Bank of England about Bitcoin specifically, as distinct from crypto, and make sure that they have accurate information in front of them. And in some respects, that's a bit of a long game, because a lot of the change here will happen incrementally. Maybe in a year's time, an intern will be asked, "Oh, could you put up the data that we have on Bitcoin lending?" And hopefully our piece will be one of the first pieces that they've put up from their inbox or from the internet. So it's a long game, but hopefully we'll get there in the end.
Yeah, laying a really important foundation. Appreciate that. Two last questions. One, how much do you and I and Susie and I think a lot of other people in similar positions, we do our damnedest to differentiate between Bitcoin and crypto. And I think what I'm getting, like I speak with the Stand With Crypto crowd a lot. So a bigger organization here in the States that did a lot of work around the election. I think they're, large part funded by Coinbase. And I tend to sort of get along with them because I try to look at it like a Venn diagram. Where do our incentives sort of align? And lately I've actually been having a lot of people on this show. I had the head of the DeFi education fund. Now she considers something like Bitcoin DeFi, but she also is very much into smart contract DeFi and all that stuff. But my feelings on this is that we're at a point where I'm like, I'd much rather take I don't want to start calling these people shitcoiners. I'd much rather say, where do our incentives align when it comes to P2P rights, and build with that, and then sort of maybe just not touch on some of the other stuff that maybe feels a bit more unsavory about crypto. When it comes to building alliances at this point, what does it look like? I feel like from the conversations I've had with Susie, she's more open to kind of thinking, okay, like let's sort of see where the incentives are aligned and build together. But at the same time, it's almost like you have to sort of be mindful of keeping a certain distance again to sort of maintain that, to continue to distinguish Bitcoin from everything else that's out there.
Yeah, correct. I think your Venn diagram illustration there is perfect. In some respects, our interests are aligned, and some they are not, and that's fine. One example that I use a lot, which I think is fantastic, is the debanking issue. So a lot of banks will refuse to process Bitcoin transactions and crypto transactions. They don't distinguish between them. So
Right.
a crypto company and a Bitcoin company have perfectly aligned incentives there to keep their access to a traditional banking account open. So that's an example where we can sit down in a room at the same table and our interests are completely aligned.
Yep.
Where our interests differ, our general policy approach is to be cordial but firm. And I tend to approach this in two ways, again, a risk profile way and a product market fit way. So, and again, I love trying to make Bitcoin boring. My wife says I'm very good at this. It's funny because it's true.
Yeah, I disagree. We always have a good laugh whenever we talk about it. So
I do too. But yeah, that's why it's fun hanging out with you. So, like from a risk profile perspective, we use a company analogy. There is a big difference between Meta, a listed company in the United States, which can offer its shares to the public, and a company that I've just incorporated the weekend in my kitchen, where I'm the sole shareholder and the sole director. Right. One of those companies can offer their shares to the public, the other can't. They have very different risk profiles. And if I'm investing in one, I'm much more likely to lose my money than investing in the other. And conveniently, Meta's share cap is not dissimilar to Bitcoin's total market cap at the moment. So it's quite a good example to have. You're talking about a $2 trillion asset that is exposed to all kinds of different investors, whether those be institutional or individual. The biggest wealth managers in the world offer access to it, and yada yada yada. You know all the stories. On the other hand, for example, you have a meme coin that some kid spun up on Solana, and again, I'm a free market maximalist. I firmly believe, even though I don't think you should, if you want to go spend your money on a meme coin, you are completely free to do that. I'm going to tell you it's a bad idea, but I'm not going to stop you from doing it.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So
yeah, I hear you.
And and I think that's, most people will see that that's a rational position to hold. I think what you're doing is stupid, but I'm not going to. Let's come back and talk after you've lost all your money. Okay. So
no, I think to quote, if you don't mind me jumping in there, Hester Pierce from the SEC, who I think is a really principled human being. She was at Bitcoin 2025 this year, and everyone started booing when meme coins got brought up. And Hester Pierce said, "Look, we're not going to oversee them at the CIA. They're not at the CIA, the SEC. They're not an investment contract." And the crowd started. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But she said they're not an investment contract, and said if you invest in them, go ahead at your own risk, enjoy yourself. And the crowd started booing, and she's like, well, that's kind of like antithetical to the whole Bitcoin thing. If you're going to start telling people what to do and not do. And I always sort of parallel that to, like, in some ways, like the gold bugs the Peter Schiffs of the world saying Bitcoin doesn't have any value. It's not the same thing. It's not a clear parallel, because Bitcoin does have value, and in my very humble opinion, it has a lot of value. But the basic premise of like financial free, do what you want. But again, to your point, when people tell me that they're doing that, or they figured out their infinite money glitch or something like that, I just say, like, let me know how that goes, and then just come back to me and I'll teach you how to use a Bitcoin hardware wallet. Like, and we'll talk afterwards.
Exactly.
I think it is important. I think for the sake of engaging in good faith with people, when it comes to having to have these conversations, like I said, in your sort of position, where do you choose to align with crypto people, even beyond sort of from a point where you're engaging with legislators or lawmakers, but just from like a ideological standpoint, like free market maximalism, great, enjoy yourself. For me, I just think Bitcoin is the only one that really matters. If you want to get into all this other stuff, that's great. Ideally, I would say to people, please, no scamming, no promising things that aren't necessarily true. With meme coins, it's kind of funny because it's kind of like there is no value. It just is pure gambling. And I don't think many people sort of say differently, but I'm not to get too off track here.
No, but
I
I
hear
think
where
it's
you're
an important point to make, though. I
yeah,
respect the honesty of meme coins in that they no longer pretend to have any utility or value beyond gambling.
right.
And humans have been gambling probably as long as we've been an intelligent species, and
Yep.
we'll probably can keep going with our gambling until we become extinct. I'm totally
Totally.
fine with that. It's gambling is a regulated industry. It's a shame when people take it too far. But
Yep.
if you want to gamble on a meme coin, I think you're an idiot. But hey,
Right.
you know what? You're free to choose, and I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to impinge on your freedom to choose. I
Um,
respect their naked honesty.
totally.
Honestly, I find a meme coin a much more honest proposition than someone pretending that ADA is going to replace Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's a good point. I also think of what's his name, Arthur Hayes from BitMEX, with the meme. Not to bring this thing into just a meme coin conversation, but I do find it funny when he says stuff like, I think when Doge was ripping last cycle, he's like, you have all these serious Wall Street guys and everything else, and then you just have some kids like essentially messing around on the internet and just totally
Yeah,
outperforming or whatever. That being
exactly.
said, somebody was holding that Doge bag, so I'm not telling anybody to go and do that. It's not I
Mm.
wouldn't say it's ethical, but it is what it is. Let's land the plane. I know that you were doing something right before this. You had another interview right before this. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you've put out a thread telling people how to maintain better privacy. But when it comes to an everyday citizen, and in both the US and the UK, where as much of these things overlap, what are some things that people maybe should start? Let's say you're sort of into Bitcoin. Like you said, maybe you're one of these people who bought a little bit of Bitcoin, you have it on your Coinbase account, but you've been listening to some podcasts, you've been learning more about it, you're interested, it does feel like something you want to protect. What are some everyday actions that you could take as a citizen of one of our countries to start to show your support for Bitcoin, and to say that it's something that you feel like you have a right to, and that the government should be protecting that right to?
That's fantastic. Well, I mean, all kinds of different things you can do, both in terms, I think, of your personal behaviors and any outreach that you want to do. So maybe hitting that second point first, in terms of outreach, if this is something you care about and something in which you're invested, I'd encourage you to become as political as you possibly can. And by that, I mean, if you see that a proposition is being voted for in the Senate or in Congress, call your congressperson, call your senator, get involved, send emails, let them know, because ultimately we live in representative democracies, and our representatives are supposed to reflect our views and our concerns. And in fairness to them, they can't do that unless you tell them what those concerns are.
Yep.
So, and if you're in the UK, keep an eye out for our upcoming means of contacting your MPs. If anyone's worried about collection of personal data, no personal data is kept or retained by BP UK at all. It simply links in order to identify your MP, and then none of that data is kept. So we're trying to practice what we preach here. Get involved. Let them know what your views are, and then, because in fairness to them, if you don't tell them, they don't know, and
Yep.
if they don't know that, then they will likely be guided by people who don't know as much as you do about the space.
Yep.
And then in terms of your own personal behaviors, try and experiment with self custody. That you don't need immediately to go to a hardware wallet. Armin the Palman has a fantastic 6 or 7 stage process of becoming a Bitcoiner.
Mm,
which I'd highly recommend, and I may be able to ping you the link, Frank. It's a piece I
please.
read many
Yeah.
years ago, and he has a lovely progression really, where day one is maybe you're buying Bitcoin on Coinbase and leaving it there, and then perhaps you move from that to downloading a piece of software like Blue Wallet, which will enable you to make an on-chain transaction to your phone wallet, which is a hot wallet, so it's not as secure. And then you might
Right.
move from there to buying your first Trezor or buying a cold card. Actually, shit, you'll probably buy a Trezor first. Cold cards are a bit more advanced.
Yeah.
um,
Totally.
and get used to making transfers off each. It's scary for some people making that first on-chain transaction.
It's
I mean,
a
it's a
lot.
long time ago since I did my first one now, but I can remember how scared I was the first time I actually made a transfer,
Yep.
and also how much my mind was blown when I saw it arrive. And back then, the mempool was completely empty. So,
Right. It's pretty empty today too,
well, my
actually, to
God,
be
it is.
honest.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
like back in the OG mempool days, aren't we? Yeah. So yeah,
Yep.
and I just genuinely encourage people to experiment with the technology. There should be something that is fun and playful in a weird kind of way, because it's all new. We are literally at the bleeding edge of a new financial system. We're figuring
Mhm.
this out as we go along,
Yep.
and unless you take those steps to test your own limits and to go beyond them, we're never going to do that.
Yep.
I think those are the two things I'd encourage people to do.
Appreciate that. I think that's a perfect place to leave it. I'll add one thing if you don't mind. I think also when it comes to becoming a Bitcoiner, as you put it, Freddie, I think that process is really more than just taking some of your hard earned dollars and investing in a Bitcoin. It is learning this technology and how the technology actually works, because that's when you start to feel, I think, as you alluded to, not just so much of a psychological change, but there's a bit of an emotional change, because it's like, whoa, now I have this device. It's now my responsibility. And there's a sense of empowerment that comes with that. And I think it's a tremendous feeling that unfortunately a lot of people don't feel. I've had this conversation with the guys at Unchained who offer like a retirement account where you actually hold the keys versus buying a Bitcoin ETF. And they're like, yeah, so many people open that account with us, went through that process of holding a wallet that's part of a multi-sig quorum. And they're just blown away. There's
Mm.
this sense of like, wow, this is really my thing to take care of. For some people, I understand why that might be overwhelming, but I do think it's really important. It's an important part of the equation to learn, because it's like it's interacting with the digital world in a way that I don't think we never have. You know what I mean? We have the keys for our encrypted messaging apps are on our phones. They're not our responsibility to hold. They're built into the software for our phones. So it's a bit of a different experience. With Bitcoin, it takes a little bit more responsibility. Same with Noster. But I think it really is important to create those key pairs and to know what it looks like. But yeah,
Yeah.
Freddie, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Where can people find you, and where can they find the work that you're doing with BP UK?
Easy to find. So I'm most active on X or Twitter. My handle is at Freddie New, all one word, and our website is in my bio. So very easy to find us, and all of our work portfolio is on our website, and it's all public domain. So if anyone needs to lift any of my boring stuff, then they are more than welcome.
There you go.
Thank you for
Yeah,
having me, Frank.
perfect.
Great to chat.
The pleasure's all mine. If you're not following Freddie already, poet and I don't even know it, make sure to do so right after this. Freddie, thank you for joining us. We will talk soon, my friend.
Lovely to be here. Thank you, Frank.